Coolkid and Noli are both killers in Forsaken, and they're probably the most identical characters in the entire game, at least kit-wise. This often leads to people comparing them and arguing over which one is better, which is why in today's video I'll be going over their stats and abilities to ultimately determine which is better. I'll be doing this in two different ways. First, I'll be comparing their stats and abilities, and ranking them on a scale of 1 through 10. Then I'll be taking those rankings and adding them up for a final score. Of course, whoever scores higher is the victor. Then I'll be giving my own personal opinions on them based around my own experiences and just how well I personally think they handle. So with that said, sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. Let's start off with stats. Coolkid has 800 HP, which is the lowest of all killers currently in the game, a 7.5 walking speed, and a 28 running speed, and his tear radius is 60 studs. This is pretty decent. However, it is important to note that Coolkid is the only killer in the game who can be killed by a large and coordinated team of Chances and Elliots. So with that said, I'll be giving Coolkid a 7 out of 10 here, as his HP really does hold him back a lot. Noli has 1,111 HP, a 7.5 walking speed like Coolkid, and a 27 running speed, and he has the largest tear radius in the game at 80 studs. Overall, I think Noli gets an 8 out of 10. The things that hold Noli back a lot is how his abilities mix in with his stats. Although it's not that bad, it's still a lot more noticeable than other killers. So Coolkid has no passives, which kind of automatically gives this to Noli, and in my opinion, Noli's passives are very situational, as good players just won't fall for things like fake generators or fake clones, unless the situation's dire. Hallucination's alright, but it's still easily counterable by smart players. I'll give Noli's passives a 6 out of 10, as they're not useless, but they're a far cry from John Doe, who's Noli's only competition, and his passives work in every situation, no matter what map, and no matter what kind of players you're playing against. You can always parry a stun as long as there's a sentinel with 404 air or spike, and his trail is just free damage. And unless his trail bugs out, it's always going to be there. Now moving on to the abilities, we'll be starting off with Coolkid once more, and Coolkid's first ability is Punch, or just his M1. He has a 0.1 second windup, or almost instant, and his hitbox lingers for 0.3 seconds, which is the longest linger of all the killer M1s in the game. Punch's cooldown is 2 seconds, and Coolkid has the smallest of M1s, with his only being about 5 studs in size. Finally, his M1 deals 26.5 damage. I'd give Punch a 7 out of 10, as its linger is pretty good, especially for Xbox players like myself. It just feels so much more natural than other characters. However, it really can't be any higher than 7 out of 10, as other characters like John Doe and Slasher exist. Next up is Corrupt Nature, which acts as one of Coolkid's anti-looping abilities. Corrupt Nature is this projectile you throw at survivors. If it lands, it does 15 damage and applies slowness 1 for 4 seconds, while revealing their aura for 10 seconds. It also has almost no windup, but it is noticeable and has an audio that plays while it travels. Finally, its cooldown is 12 seconds. Now, this ability is pretty OP if landed, but it can be very easy to miss. I think it deserves a 6 out of 10 for that reason, as it's good, but not really OP. It's probably the only ability in Coolkid's kit that I'd consider more situational over just being decent to use whenever. Now we have my favorite ability in Coolkid's kit, this being Walk Speed Override. Walk Speed has a very short animation that plays before he then dashes straight into whatever you're looking at. If Walk Speed is landed, it does 30 damage instantly while dealing out another 15 in fire damage, rounding out to be about 45 damage. It's a super good punish to use when sentinels miss, and it's also super good against unsuspecting players, or after you use Corrupt Nature, in close quarters, so on and so forth. Finally, it only has a cooldown of 20 seconds, which makes it pretty reliable. I gotta give this ability a solid 9 out of 10. The only reason it's not a 10 is because of the insane damage outputs you can get from characters like Jason or 1X. Also, Walk Speed Override is punishing if you miss it. At the very least, it'll hold you in place for an additional second or two, but at the very worst, it practically puts you at the worst stamina disadvantage that you could possibly find yourself in. Finally, we have Pizza Delivery. This acts as Coolkid's ESP ability in a sense, as when it's used, Coolkid will summon 2 minions who target the closest survivor. If these minions hit the survivor, they'll do 15 damage. I'm pretty sure this is calculating if both minions hit the survivor, but I'm not 100% sure. It might be calculating the burn damage that the minions apply as well. Maybe somebody could let me know down below, as I'm way too lazy to actually test this. Once a minion does hit you, it will apply Burning 1 and Slowness 2 for 3 seconds. They also reveal the survivor's aura for 15 seconds. Finally, it has a cooldown of 50 seconds. This ability acts as very good anti-loop, finding survivors, and even to a certain degree, it's a decent punishment. With all said, I'll be giving it an 8 out of 10 for its versatility and just being a decent ability all around. This brings our final scoring for Coolkid to 37, but now it's time to see how well Noli can compare. Starting off with Noli's first ability, which is Stab, or his M1. It has a 1.8 second windup with a short 0.25 second linger. Noli's got the biggest hitbox to my knowledge, with a whopping 7.5 studs in size. Once an M1 is landed, it'll deal about 25 damage. Finally, its cooldown is 1.8 seconds. Noli's M1's actually kinda hard to rank, as it's good, but it's bad at the same time, and really just depends on the situation. Its long windup makes it bad for loops, and especially bad for guest. But the hitbox is so big, it makes up for it in a way. I think I'll give it a 6 out of 10, as it's just too situational and easy to juke, and again, guest is just such a big counter for that windup. Next up is Void Rush. Void Rush is the first ability Noli stole from Coolkid. It's basically just a glorified walk speed override. It lasts longer and can be aimed to an extent. You also don't instantly deal massive damage, as you need to hit somebody twice in order to get the slam down. This allows you to chain it, which also stacks the damage, meaning if you chain enough people, you could basically kill an Elliot or a 2-time instantly. The second Void Rush you can do will have increased speed if you sprint before doing it. Also, the first 1.12 seconds of using Void Rush, you can make super sharp turns, allowing for some pretty cheeky hits. Yeah, I'm not gonna filter it. This ability is absolutely insane. Void Rush is super powerful in a decent player's hands. However, it is pretty situational, as you need survivors to be grouped up, and if you miss the slam down, you might as well have wasted the chain. Also, its cooldown is 20 seconds. I think this ability is a solid 8 out of 10. The reason it's not higher is just because it's super easy to mess up, and it's kinda situational, as you can only get a high damage output if the players are grouped up, and they're not taking precautions to avoid Void Rush, which kind of surprises me how often people don't take those precautions. It's super easy. Just make sure there's corners nearby that you can turn, and places where Noli just can't get to you with Void Rush. Void Rush would definitely be a 10 out of 10 ability if it was just easier to hit, not so punishing to miss. Anyways, on to the next ability, which is Nova. Nova is basically just a copied version of Coolkid's Corrupt Nature. Like Corrupt Nature, you'll throw out the Void Star at survivors. However, unlike Corrupt Nature, it has an explosive radius that pulls survivors into it. This only deals 15 damage, but almost guarantees the stamina advantage and a free M1 or 2. You can also self-detonate these by using the ability a second time, meaning you can just use it whenever. And finally, its cooldown is only 12 seconds, making it pretty spammable. Now, a common theme you've probably noticed with the other two abilities is me calling them situational, and this ability's no different. As just like the last two, this one could be absolutely useless against certain loops, or just decent juking, or stamina management. Unlike Void Rush, which only got a high ranking because of the absurd damage output, I think Nova only really gets a 6 out of 10. It's just too easy to miss, and a pro survivor can almost always avoid these. You really only hit them at the survivors being caught off guard, or you predict them. The final ability in Noli's kit is Observant. Observant is like Noli's ESP, but it has a few other uses similarly to Coolkid's Pizza Delivery. Basically, once used, Noli will enter a stance where he can pick a generator, any generator, around the map to teleport to. He can be stunned in this stage, but decent Nolis can easily avoid that, as it's well, common sense. Just don't teleport when the sentinels are next to you. Once Noli teleports, all survivors will be given hallucination, which stacks higher the farther you are from where Noli teleported to. This reveals their auras, which lasts for a pretty long time. A little longer than it probably should. I think it's like 15 seconds. Which allows you to use Void Rush to immediately get your slam down, as if a survivor has a hallucination 2 or higher, slam down is immediate, instead of requiring 2 hits. Or you could just use this ability to close distance or predict survivors you're already chasing. For example, let's say you teleport to a generator where you think they're gonna go, and they go there. Well, suddenly they've walked right into you. It's a decent ability, and probably the only one that can be considered consistent, as it basically works every single time. With that said, I'll be giving it a solid 8 out of 10, as it's just a decent ability. This brings Noli to 41, which is higher than Coolkid by just 4 points. It's important to note that Noli really dominated with passives, and if Coolkid had any of his own, he might have won. I also won't filter it. Noli is a powerhouse. His abilities are very strong in general. But then again, Coolkid is a lot less situational than Noli, which brings me over to my thoughts. As somebody with over 400 hours on the game, I think I have pretty good input on this topic. Like I said, Noli's abilities are 100% stronger, but Coolkid's are much less situational. For example, Noli can be defeated by good looping, as his kit has no anti-loop. Sure, Nova's a lifesaver if you can hit it, and Void Rush basically gives you the free stamina advantage. However, you could easily be countered by a stun, or an ability used by the survivor. And in maps like Har Hotel or York's Resting Place, God forbid your soul if you've ever been caught at the graveyard loop, this basically amplifies looping to a whole nother level, as Noli is just about as good as a fish out of water on those maps. His Void Rush can also be countered pretty easily by just sharp turns and corners, and chaining really just relies on survivors being nearby. On the other hand, Coolkid has 2 abilities that work wonders for anti-loop, plus he has punishment, which is something Noli lacks. I personally think Coolkid's better, as he's easier to use, and he has pretty powerful abilities, and is probably one of the only killers in the game who isn't really affected by map selection. That still doesn't really change the fact that Noli is a powerhouse at the end of the day. And in the right hands, and of course, statistically speaking, Noli is definitely better, as he has passives, a high damage output. However, Noli is just a lot more dependent on the current situation. Noli requires fast thinking, and is definitely a much more skill-based killer. At the end of the day, whichever killer is better is really up to you to decide, as you could be a better Noli or a better Coolkid. But if you were to ask me, I personally think Coolkid's just a little bit better, as he's just easier to use, and again, his abilities are very powerful if utilized correctly. Anyways, with all said, this has been Wendigo, and I am going to sleep now.